You open this door with the key of reason. Beyond it is another dimension. A dimension of truth. A dimension of freedom. A dimension of joy. You're moving into the land of both the ideal and the real, of the possible and the actual. You've just crossed over into the Capitalist Corner.
Where reason meets reality, welcome to the Capitalist Corner.
Welcome, everybody, to the Capitalist Corner. I'm your host, Michael Liebowitz, joined today by the wonderful James Stevens Valliant. We've got a very robust program for you today. Numerous topics. I will just tell you, please check out the latest episode of The Rational Egoist, where Mr. Valliant and I break down the virtue of integrity and how it should be applied to self-improvement. And please remember, audience, that we very much appreciate the super chats and the super stickers. Jim, welcome here to the show.
Always great to be here, my brother.
So, Jim, it's not in the description of the episode because it didn't really come across my feed until moments before. But it is something that's been on my mind for a while, and I want to talk to you about it. Now, you and I slightly differ on the war in Iran, not as much as people may want to make about it, but slightly. But I don't want to actually argue.
Just a little difference about warfare.
Yeah, I want to talk about when you're arguing, when you want to convince somebody. So my position is, first of all, I'm a constitutional originalist. So I argue, first thing, you need a declaration of war. But then I've stated over and over again, I'm open to being convinced, but I'm skeptical. My skepticism is based on, in addition to what the current regime is, right? But the United States government has a history of either getting us into war through lies or bad information. Remember the Maine? The Lusitania was not carrying any weapons. The Gulf of Tonkin resolution, the war in Iraq, there's going to be stockpiles of weapons of mass destruction. And the current regime has come out and, Venezuela's emptying their prisons and mental institutions. They're a terrorist regime siding with Tren de Aragua. So when the government tells me things, I'm skeptical. Now, add to that the latest intelligence report, 2026, says Iran wasn't building a nuke, that they are not an imminent threat. Now, the IAEA says that they are enriching uranium up to 60% and that there's very little civilian use for 60%. But the same IAEA says Iran was not building a nuclear weapon. So there's a lot of conflicting information out there. Now, you've rightly said, and I agree with you, look, Iran has attacked U.S. interests in the past. They've killed Americans. They've killed Americans in the past. They've sponsored terror around, the Middle East, and they've tried to assassinate an American president. There's a good enough case for a war with Iran that can go to Congress that doesn't rely on hyperbole. So I'm going to tell you two things that I read in the last 2 days.
I hope so.
And to me, this is not helpful because anybody that can Google can do a little research on this. So one claim that I saw this morning was that it's an existential war. The West cannot survive if the Iranian regime stays intact. Then the claim was they're rebuilding. Now, notice there's a difference between rebuilding and pursuing. That's very, very important. Rebuilding hypersonic missiles. You look that up, and it's very much disputed that Iran has ever had hypersonic missiles. They've claimed to, yes, but their government lies more than ours. Right.
Yeah, but they've actually used Fatah 1 and Fatah 2 rockets, which are missiles, which are pretty darn sophisticated and are
fine
on the way to.
Jim. But that's not the same thing as being hypersonic.
Well, that's true. It's not like the missiles that we think China has. For example.
So the next thing was they're rebuilding long-range missiles. The estimates are they could build an ICBM, which is what a long-range missile is, a missile that can hit us by 2035. Then there was the claim.
The year that it'll happen, I just know that they have a very ambitious missile
See,
program.
this is what, but what you're doing, I don't like, and I'm going to tell you why in a second.
Okay.
The other claim was that they're rebuilding nukes.
Well, they certainly have demonstrated a desire for nuclear weapons.
Okay, but here's the problem, and they've shown that they're enriching uranium. That's true, to a high threshold.
Apparently, only one goal.
Okay, but you trust that, but yet the same organization that said they're not pursuing a nuclear weapon.
Well, but intelligence is just that. It's what we know and what we have evidence for. Inside a foreign country, all we can do is go by. We know there are things going on that we don't.
Jim, I don't disagree with that. But my point is simply this.
Simply says what I actually have specific information about.
Yeah.
And there's all kinds of stuff we don't know about. So what we do is we infer from the range of their missile ambition.
So hold on, Jim. So the intelligence that we're going to trust to tell us how bad they are, we dismiss. This is the problem I'm having, and it's not I'll tell you the problem I have with what you're saying compared to what the other guy's saying. The claims are demonstrably false. What he said. Anybody can look it up. Anybody in the audience can go look up. This is not difficult. What you're doing now is reframing it and stating what the truth is. But that's different.
I endeavor to
yeah, but that's fine,
Jim.
But that's fine. But that's fine. But that's not an actual defense. When people are out there making false claims, it undermines the case, especially when these people are supposed to be smart. These are objectivists. Objectivists are supposed to be committed to reality, evidence-based. Prove it. Missouri, show me. Right? But then at the end of what I'm talking about, there's the dismissal. Basically, if you disagree with this, you're a moral failure. So he makes multiple false claims, demonstrably false, presents no evidence for any of them, doesn't make the less robust, or rather the less extreme but realist case, and then says, if you question me, something's wrong. That's a problem.
Well, I think that what they're trying to do is attack their debate opponent, then yeah, it's a personal attack. To try and reframe it in terms of a personal attack is a weakness in their argument. You should be able to stick to the facts and argue the point, argue the issue, and with the evidence that we do have, I am comfortable arguing that, constitutional issues aside, it is a moral thing to do to go to war with a country that clearly has tactical missile ambitions to the degree that Iran has, or nuclear ambitions to the degree that Iran has, that yells death to America, that kills Americans when they get a chance. When you put those facts together, it's clear it's a moral act of self-defense to attack Iran just on the evidence that we've got. So I can defend the morality without making exaggerated or speculative factual claims. Right.
And that's my point, is that it undermines the case. Similarly, a relatively prominent objectivist posted on X yesterday that Hamas has admitted that 50,000 of 70,000 people killed were combatants, not civilians. That's flat false. That's flat bullshit. I don't know what the actual numbers are because I don't trust Hamas as far as I can throw them, and most of the information comes out of their health and whatever agency.
Yeah, the Gaza Health Ministry is just a mouthpiece for Hamas.
Yeah, but the claim was that Hamas admitted it, which is demonstrably false.
Oh, who gave us these numbers?
It came from... hold on, I got to go to X to find the actual. Actually,
what we do know, while you're doing that, I mean, I can just confirm that just about everything that has come out of the Gaza Health Ministry's mouth has been a provable lie, either statistically highly improbable or impossible in terms of the casualty figures that we've gotten out of Gaza. Those are straight up lies. So we know we've been in a world where they talk about more than an exaggeration, just straight up lies. coming from Hamas about their casualties.
All right, so this was the claim here. I'll read the entire post to you. And it says the final casualty toll in October 7th war in Gaza, according to Hamas's own pension payments. So they're judging this by pension payments. 50,000 Hamas terrorist soldiers, 20,000 civilians. 20 civilian casualties is genocide. You know, it says it's a 2-to-1 ratio of combatants to civilians, a ratio never seen in urban combat in all military history. It's all now defined as genocide. The information came from this organization, ME24.Middle East 24. The problem is
and that is one objective measure. I mean, they may not pay everybody pensions, I guess would be.
Jim, the numbers aren't for combatants killed. They're for people. I believe, I mean, I can do this right now, but the fact is that it's just not an accurate claim. Hold on, I got it right here. I'll copy the whole thing and I will fact check it right now live. But go ahead and talk about it if you want.
I mean, it does seem to me that if the source is a more objective measure, because they do pay people who are, quote, victims of Israeli, quote, aggression, which is all total nonsense. Of course, it misses the moral point that civilians who die in the course of a war, of self-defensive war, are the moral responsibility of the aggressor, full stop, whatever the numbers. So the numbers aren't terribly significant to me. On the other hand, if we get numbers that are more realistic, that seem to correspond with the facts of reality, unlike the Hamas numbers we've gotten so far, they're probably a more objective measure.
Okay, here's the problem, and I want to state it exactly. I know it, but I want to make sure that I'm reading it and getting it exactly. Again, if that's the case, you just made a different argument, Jim, which I happen to largely agree with, right? But that's different. You don't need to fudge numbers. You don't need to make things up in order to make the case. No. When you do this, when somebody who's on the fence sees this, and I see this type of thing all the time, okay, fact check, false, misinterpreted. And this is from Grok. And by the way, Grok gives me the, whenever I go through various things, Grok gives the further right interpretation of things almost every time. Yeah. The 50,000 figure does not, and I fact checked this in other places too. This is just what I have right in front of me. The 50,000 figure does not come from Hamas admitting 50,000 fighters killed via pension payments limited to terrorist widows. It originates from a February 2026 announcement by the Hamas-run Ministry of Social Development launching a new aid program, monthly stipends to widows of Gazans killed in the war. So any widow of somebody killed in the war gets these payments. The M24, whatever the hell that was, interpreted this and put it out as 50,000 combatants. And then the other guy reposts it, backs up the claim, evidently didn't do a lick of fact checking on it because it's not difficult to find. So it says, by early February 2026, 19,000 widows had received payments. The ministry stated it planned to reach 50,000 widowed families, not strictly widows of fighters or even exclusively wives. Broader, vulnerable, war-affected families are included. This is not restricted to Hamas combatants' families. It covers widows of all war dead. Not every killed fighter was married, and many young unmarried recruits do not leave widows. So, again, there's strong enough argument here without resorting to when you
cannot
do
say
that,
with certainty that 50,000 combatants, for example, no, that would be stretching the evidence beyond. I agree, would be stretching the evidence beyond what it supports. On the other hand, it does give us some idea that dramatically contradicts what the information that people, that Israel's engaged in genocide people. In other words, it is enough evidence for me to say their numbers were wildly off whack. I do not from this report have confidence that, 50,000 combatants. I agree.
Well, there's no way to infer anything about combatants
Well,
from the actual numbers.
there is some way to infer about the real death toll, because I mean there is a relationship between the married.
Oh, sure. Yeah. You could say you could figure out the death toll, but you can't tell who's killed.
Well, that's the point. We can't specify who's been killed.
So what I want to say about it is this, Jim, and you've been around objectivists a lot longer than I have, but something I've come across quite a bit with a lot of objectivists, by no means all, and I'm just saying with a significant enough amount where it registers for me, is they've read Ayn Rand, they love the rhetorical style, they like the certainty. What they don't want to do is engage in the logical rigor. And rhetorical flash with moral certainty absent logical rigor is dangerous.
That is
not
absolutely
good.
Correct. You don't want to overstate your case. You undermine your credibility every time. You also, for the integrity of your own thinking, you want to be careful about what your facts are, their source, their accuracy, and what you can reasonably infer from that. So to my way of thinking, though, Michael, it is when we get into the weeds of details like that, when those details matter that much, there's already something wrong with our thinking. In other words, if we're trying to say, well, are they currently building a nuclear missile? We're missing the point of the danger of nukes. Or do they currently have an ICBM? That is, again, missing the point. Can we classify what they have as hypersonic missiles? Again, that's stressing a detail that has no real significance to me in terms of the moral case for self-defense. And so my response to you would be these are different. These are detailed inferences.
So hold on, Jim.
Significant moral difference.
Wait a second. So the fact that the United States government has misled us into war, including the current president, by the way, and this is just a couple months ago. This isn't like just a couple months ago, right? The fact that our own intelligence challenges this idea. You're telling me that's irrelevant? Like that's not something that needs to be taken into consideration?
Intelligence tells us the facts that our intelligence has in a state of vast unknowns. That's why it's wrong to infer if Tulsi Gabbard testifies X, that's what the situation is.
I would never say that though. But this is my issue, Jim.
Okay.
You are so basically this is what ends up happening then. Anybody that questions anything, people that support the war can come out and make all kinds of exaggerated, outlandish statements, right? But if you question those outlandish statements, that's wrong. That's ridiculous.
Years we have discouraged Iran from continuing in a program, and therefore we have, quote, no evidence that they're still building a nuclear missile. That does not alter big evidence that says that they are, and their long-term goals are that. In other words, if we will back out of the situation, guess what they'll go back to doing?
Well, hold on. Well, see, okay. This is where I'm going to go nuts, because if I actually tell you what the evidence is, then it's, oh, look, this guy's defending Iran. No. Right? So you see, therein lies the problem.
I'm going to come down on your side. If you have good reason to think this is not in our country's self-interest and argue against the war, that does not mean you're defending Iran. And I will defend you. I will go to the barricades to defend you in terms of saying that you aren't supporting this murder.
Okay, so I got a question for you, Jim. I Like Numbers says that they froze their program but made it so they could do nuclear in weeks. What does that mean to you? They could do nuclear in weeks. What does that mean?
It's vague on the face of it, but if you're saying that they could, I don't know how quickly they could put a nuclear missile.
No, but I'm saying that based on what the evidence is, granted there's things we don't know, based on the evidence that we have, the statement there, because that's not a misstatement, it's that they could have nuclear in weeks. But here's the thing.
I cannot say they're weeks away from a nuke.
No, there's a big difference. So when someone reads that claim right there, they can have nuclear in weeks. And you challenge that. Oh, but you're defending the Iranians. No, what I'm defending is truth. It's simply not true. There's no intelligence assessment anywhere that says that the Iranians could have a nuclear bomb within weeks. None.
Well,
it does not exist.
There are a variety of ways you can try and get a nuclear missile.
And let me say operative nuclear bomb within weeks.
So what we're saying is they've got all kinds of underground facilities. We don't know what the hell's going on there. What we do know with some certainty is that they've enriched uranium to a point where they have nuclear ambitions. Now, what is the state of their current program? I don't know. How close are they? I don't know. Are they actively right now engaged? I don't know. I do know they have deep underground facilities where we don't know what the hell's going on. I do know that they have exhibited an enrichment program to the degree that you can only be explained by their pursuit of a nuclear bomb. Now, that is enough for me to make the
so that again, that it can only be explained not according to what I've seen. What I've seen says that's the most likely scenario.
Okay, can you give me another reason for 60% enriched uranium?
Yeah, go ahead and tell a story.
Well, I mean, there's no case for, there's no medical purposes, no civilian energy development purposes that could get you to 50%, much less 60% reasonably. There's only one and only one purpose to enrich uranium to that point, and that is to get a weapon. According to, and this is, I grant you, this is Mr. Wickoff and Trump's negotiators, they proudly admitted we've got X amount of, they even gave us the weight, which is about enough to make 10 or 11 nuclear missiles if they fully enrich it, if they enrich it, say, to around 90% or more. There is no purpose for 60% enriched uranium other than weapons. We've seen them. I mean, you have to be able to put things together. Simply the number and variety of missiles that they've launched since October 7th, 2023, against Israel, against other countries, against their various neighbors, shows the range and ambition of their missile program. And so there was no question. They were able to shoot a missile at Diego Garcia. One didn't get there. One was shot down.
Yeah.
But that point is, look at how if that pans out, they can already reach most of Europe.
I'm going to back off my statement a little bit because of what I had previously read. I think I misunderstood it. So Ian Gilmore says some types of nuclear reactors use uranium enriched above 50%. I'm no expert on this, right? So I'm not even close. But it does, what it says is that what I'm looking at says there's no established civilian use, but it does say the only, hold on, I got to back up here. It talks about, Iran's stated rationale is naval propulsion fuel. It's the one semi-coherent civilian argument since naval reactors use HEU. But it says analysts across the board identify serious problems with this claim. So by and large, I think and by the way, I'm not even saying they're not. Like, that's not my point. My point is that if you're going to make arguments.
Their Navy doesn't even seem to justify that. But on the other hand, what else do you need besides their putting the puzzle pieces together? It's quite plain that they would love nothing more than a nuclear missile.
See, I want to, and this is not what I wanted to talk about. I didn't want, because I don't want to argue about going to war with Iran. What I wanted to talk about was people making cases that are not evidence-based. That's it. And when you say to me, oh, but it doesn't matter, which is their overstatements don't matter because you're getting into technical stuff.
Well, I didn't say their overstatements don't matter. I said the opposite. I say that if you overstate something, then you're undermining your own credibility. And in fact, your own argument isn't as good in your own thinking. I agree with that.
So,
on the other hand, the question is, what is the significance of the distinction that you're drawing?
I'll tell you what the significance is. The significance is that we did not need to rush into a war with Iran. That's the significance. The significance is there was time to go to Congress, which
The
is
imminent-
directly.
You see,
Yeah.
that's it. So to make a case, it's again connected to your concern about the constitutional issue, the imminence of it, the legal issue here. And I absolutely see that the Trump administration is playing verbal games precisely because, I mean, Trump has said it himself. I don't want to use the word war because if I use the word war, then
Right.
that's something different than if I
Yeah.
use the term imminent threat.
Yes.
Imminent threat is a legally distinction. Morally speaking, for the broader moral argument, I have enough evidence to know what their long-term ambitions are. I don't need to tell you whether it's weeks away or years away or 2035.
But Jim, okay, that's fine. But we're talking about this war, what we're doing now, what is occurring, what's happening.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about a hypothetical just war with Iran. I'm
Right.
talking about the case being made by the administration and being made by people in support of it.
Well, I can't defend that. Trump says we've won, but we haven't won. We've
Well, that's my
achieved our
point.
objectives, but we haven't achieved our objectives. I mean, he'll feel it in his bones when
Right.
unconditional surrender has occurred. Well, what you're talking out of both sides of your mouth every time you open your mouth, Mr. Trump.
Okay.
I'm not going to defend Mr. Trump's verbalization about this. He ought to have, as any good president would have, gone to the American people and explained what he was doing in general terms and why.
Yes. So
he should have
I
gone
want
to Congress. Do I agree with that? Would his case have been so much stronger? Would that have limited his options and cast his feet in concrete? Yeah, that's part of the reason why he doesn't want to do that.
This is precisely my point. If I like numbers here is right in what he's saying here, then it's an imminent threat.
Right.
Okay.
Then it's we got to do something right now.
I do. So I like numbers is making something. So I want to address his points. He says, I don't think you're defending the mullahs. Thank you. He says, if they can produce the material they need in weeks and they have an ICBM program, do the math. Okay. The problem is they're not weeks away from having an operative nuclear bomb. That's the first thing. No. What I mean is, according to the evidence, we could deal with, speculation. We don't, but that does nothing for me. I'm talking about, according to the evidence that we have, they're not weeks away from having a nuclear bomb. They're also, their ICBM program is about 9 years away. So those things there are not like
Imminent. Right.
They're not imminent, but it comes off as that. So then I like numbers says the War Powers Act gives him 60 days before going to Congress. That's 30 days at this point. No. Technically, you're right. If in the case of an emergency, the president acts to go to war, the War Powers Act says, 1, he has to consult Congress within 48 hours. Then he has to, gives him 60 days before going to Congress and getting permission and all that stuff. But the War Powers Act does not say under any circumstances.
No.
The War Powers Act is limiting.
Already says it's got to be in an emergency.
Right. It has the constitutional outside the War Powers Act. The Constitution gives the president the authority in the case of an imminent emergency to act. The War Powers Act further limits that and says he has to do this stuff. It's not a general grant of power to the president to go bomb whoever the hell he wants.
Power. In the 1973
Yes.
War Powers Act was intended to, certainly based on the claims the presidents have made. And, every president, though, since the War Powers Act has said that is an unconstitutional limit on his power.
Right. The presidents don't like it
Obama
because
went to a months-long war with Libya.
bombing the hell out of
without
them.
any permission from Congress.
Right. See, I like numbers. What I don't think you're getting here is you say he consulted the Gang of Eight. That's fine. But if it's not an imminent emergency, it's irrelevant.
In the War Powers. But the way Congress, my point about Obama and the way Congress and the president are approaching this is that both sides sort of assume that, what is imminent is in the president's discretion. And that it maybe even presidents can do more. So we're living in a constitutional reality that I absolutely agree is not what the framers had in mind. I wish it were. I wish we could rewind the tape. But presidents have been claiming a much greater power than I think is warranted under the Constitution. And that conditions also the way we look at the War Powers Act. Presidents think that thing is unconstitutional. Now, I think it's unconstitutional for entirely different reasons at the other end of the spectrum. Congress is delegating too much war power to the president. Now, but look, we're dealing in a constitutional reality where the Congress and the president are acting as though, well, the president can, in his discretion, engage in something if he believes it's imminent.
Yeah. See, this is what this is, and I'm not disagreeing with you, Jim. That is the reality that the presidents have been doing. But okay, then let's not cite the Constitution. Like, I don't see the point in this. Right.
Well, we're compelled to morally evaluate policies separate from our constitutional evaluation.
Oh, but see, I don't think you can do that. Mm-hmm. I don't think you can do that because you have a president. First of all, everybody that gets.
I think, unfortunately, we're compelled to do that.
Well, here's the problem.
The Supreme Court is part of our constitutional system. So if the Supreme Court tells me, for example, that the Commerce Clause supports the FBI, then I'm afraid I'm already in the weeds of having to say, well, this would be a moral thing for the FBI to do, and this would be an immoral thing, regardless of the Constitution, because the Supreme Court very frequently forces that distinction.
Okay. So one, the Supreme Court hasn't ruled on this issue.
Well, that's true in this matter, and it is a better part of the Constitution too. It's not a dubious.
No. So my answer is this, Jim.
But both the Supreme Court and the existing reality, because the Supreme Court will say it isn't justiciable, or we don't want to get involved in that kind of policy. And so if the Supreme Court ignores an issue, which they do on purpose in these matters, then the reality that Congress and the president are assuming is our constitutional reality, as if it were a Supreme Court decision. Yeah, that's the environment, the constitutional understanding environment in which we have to operate, whether I like it or not.
Okay, but here's the thing. If we just sit back and concede, if that's going to be our mode, then let's not argue for the Constitution anymore. I mean, what's the point?
What I end up doing is that's why I hang on decisions that come from the Supreme Court, and why I listen to arguments. I know it's an incremental thing. I know it's glacial in its change. I know that when the Supreme Court changes direction, so I'm acutely aware of the little micron different changes when the Supreme Court turns and says, "Oh no, big issue." For example, on delegation of power, the big issue doctrine. Big question doctrine. Oh, yay! We've moved that closer to a better. And so that's what I have to be cheering and booing is, are we getting closer to the constitutional norms that I would prefer, or are we getting farther away from them? Because between the 1920s and all the way up to the current time, they've been moving away. Now, if in recent decades they start pushing back on the extent of the Commerce Clause, yay! If they start pushing back, if they say there's regulatory takings, yay! If they say you can't delegate it just any old thing, and the administrative agency determines its own jurisdiction. And no, there's the big question doctrine. Okay, yay! So what I do is I fight the little fights in the meantime, and I'm pushing back against a constitutional system, because if we lose any respect for the Supreme Court, if we say, look, any little difference and it's all over. No.
But Jim, that's not what you're saying, Jim. You're not saying any little difference.
Okay.
These aren't little differences.
You're going to go to in other words, I say I chuck in my whole ambitions about the Constitution because something about the Supreme Court or the way the Congress and the president come to understand.
No, that's not what I'm saying. Okay. What I'm saying is that if we're going to argue, look, the Constitution's been violated over and over again. Over and over again. This is the precedent. Okay, well then let's just go by precedent. The whole point is that you're supposed to check your precedents and your president against the highest law of the land, which is the Constitution. The Constitution is the means by which we can critique the Supreme Court, we can critique the president, we can critique Congress. If we just say, well, they've been violating it long enough now, so we just have to accept it and go with it.
No, then it does force me in reality to take a side on, say, a policy issue that I think, okay, the government ought not to be doing that at all. But if the government is going to do that, what is the moral policy, even independent of the Constitution? So it does force that split screen analysis.
Okay. So what I would say, Jim, what I would say then, Jim, you can do that. You can say, for instance, independent of a constitution, let's imagine there was none. What would be the moral position here to do? You can do that, but that doesn't negate in reality the Constitution's moral significance.
No, it does not.
That's my point.
You have. If I'm not going to let go of the entire thing,
no,
if I'm
but
going
Jim,
to make any little difference, okay, that's it. Screw it.
Jim, presidents, Congress, judges, they all take an oath. They give their word that they're going to uphold the Constitution. This president in particular has said he wants to restore it to how it was at the beginning. He said that type of stuff over and over again.
I'd love if that were even vaguely what he
Well, of course it isn't. But how do you not then assess his morality in relation to the Constitution with the fact that he took an oath, the fact that he said he wants to do it, the fact that he's not going by the rule of the highest law? You can't just negate that from a moral calculus. It's part of it.
I include it in my moral calculus. In other words, what I
that's all I'm saying
is that I say, look, this whole thing is wrong. You know, at the end of the day, I'll say a war with Iran is morally justifiable. And if he'd gone to Congress, boy, it would even and got a declaration, then no one would say that it was constitutionally problematic, right? No. So whatever you think of the constitutional system on this, so in that context, if someone says, well, wait a minute here, if we're understanding this under the War Powers Act, then if we don't make the demand that he go by, for example, if change again the context to say the FBI. I think the FBI is unconstitutional. Okay, there's nothing in the Commerce Clause that supports criminal law enforcement at all, or even assistance. But do I say, is it a good thing that the FBI caught this bank robber or this kidnapper or shut down this organized crime syndicate? Yeah, good. FBI did a good moral thing, even acting outside. Now, given the fact that the Supreme Court, and then I also have the little asterisk, the Supreme Court has long ago decided that the FBI is perfectly consistent with the Constitution.
Did they?
Oh, yeah. In fact, we put the Commerce Clause and the Elastic Clause together, and you can do an FBI, according to the Supreme Court. That's part of, of course, it's part of interstate commerce. Kidnapping and bank robbing, that touches gravely on interstate commerce, don't you know? Commerce among the states, but that's a wrong understanding of the Commerce Clause. Nonetheless, the Supreme Court has long established that the Congress has nearly infinite.
Okay, so there's two things, Jim. One, I would say the Constitution is still part of the moral calculus. You can't just take it out. Two, I would say that this case here differs because the Supreme Court has not ruled on it.
Well, but there's the thing, the Supreme Court refusing to rule on it is almost as good as a Supreme Court decision. What they're saying is this is outside here.
No, the problem is that it's a question of standing and who actually has standing to bring the case.
I mean, they won't even, I can tell you right now, knowing and loving the Supreme Court as I do, I can tell you right now they won't touch this with a 10-foot pole.
Well, if Congress as a whole were to petition the court, then they may, because they would have standing. The problem is if Congress would do that, they would just step in and do what was right anyway.
Even if the Congress did it, there's a strong line of at least dicta in many cases saying, look, this is a matter of foreign and military policy. This is between the president and Congress to work out. We won't decide such cases.
I don't know. But either way, my only point here is that the Constitution has to be part of the moral calculus. It doesn't mean that you can't conceptually separate and say, what would this be if there were no Constitution? Set that aside. Is this the right thing to do? You can do that, but you can't. But when you're doing your ultimate moral calculus, you can't just say, okay, it's moral. The Constitution's irrelevant to the moral calculus.
If this were, in other words, this is the way I draw the line there, Michael. if in any new policy it is a dramatic step away from what I think is the constitutional order, from existing precedent, from existing practice, then of course that becomes a massive issue for me.
Yeah.
If, however, it is within the existing understanding, say, that Congress and the president have about a president's war powers, then I swallow hard. I say that's wrong. I'll give you a whole essay arguing against it. I will still fight for a better understanding of the Constitution, but I'll say, given the understanding of the Constitution that is governing our times, I have to then evaluate the policy within that structure, within that framework. I'm forced to. There is still better and worse within that. And unless I'm willing to throw in what's the one thing that's holding us together is the fragments left of the small fibers left of our Constitution. And I'm going to hold on to that for dear life, with everything I've got in my being, even if this constitutional order is distorted, misunderstood, misinterpreted.
Yeah. Two things I would say to that is, one, you don't have to. And here's the problem, is that as the Constitution slips more and more, it's like defending capitalism, right? I am going to defend capitalism, what capitalism actually is. I'm not going to, and I'm going to keep saying this is where I want to go, and anything that takes me in that direction, I'm for it, right?
Right.
So there's been plenty of things that have been, that they've done to interfere with capitalism, both constitutional and unconstitutional, that screw with it. And I will keep arguing, one, capitalism's good. Two, the Constitution in those equations. But the second thing that irks me, Jim, and this isn't applicable to you in the least bit, then I want to address Phil, and then I want to actually get to our stories, is that even where I disagreed with conservatives, right, on policy, when they argued from an originalist perspective, I agreed. When they argued that Roe v. Wade was bad and they criticized the Supreme Court for it, I agreed with them. But now, when the Supreme Court clearly ruled on that, I'm talking about before the most recent decision.
Yeah, Roe v. Wade couldn't be more clear.
Right. Conservatives said it's bad law, it's judicial activism, it's horrible, it's horrible, it's horrible. But when they like the policy, now it's precedent, it's already established. I don't brook hypocrisy.
Well,
Stop
that
it.
kind of hypocrisy is inexcusable.
Okay, so Phil says, assuming the Iranian theocracy continues, what if a bad actor hands them nuclear weapons, including ICBMs? What should the West response be? I got to be honest, Phil, I don't even know whether that's even possible without us seeing it. I don't know. I don't know if countries can just whip over and hand people ICBMs and without us knowing. And I don't know. I will say this: if
we have enough evidence to believe that China is the technological support behind Iran's missile program.
Yeah, and by the way, Russia gives them help also.
Oh,
and
yes.
And all of a sudden, we're letting Russia deliver oil here and there. We're taking sanctions off them. But that just complicates the whole thing. But if you're asking me if I knew Iran had a nuclear weapon and ICBMs, I would say wipe them off the map. That's what I would do.
But that's a very interesting point, though. If you believed that they say were days from a nuclear ICBM, you would think that is an imminent threat.
Yeah.
And you would think, okay, that at least kicks in the War Powers Act, if not even the Constitution.
No, I would say it's constitutional straight away.
Well, then straight up constitutional.
Yeah. If there was,
and that's what your critics need to understand.
Well,
you're not defending the Iranian.
Jim, I get what you're saying. But to me, it's such a dishonest take anyway. It's, if anybody questions the evidence I'm presenting, the same people, right? If they were to say, for instance, no, Trump did not actually mean what is commonly said when he says good people on both sides, which is true. It was taken so out of context. So what if they were to point that out? And then I was to say, you're defending Trump. You like Trump. You want Trump to be the president. They would call bullshit on that so fast it would make my head spin. And they would be right. But I wouldn't do that because I understand that's garbage.
Right. And so the fact that that is the point. if you are making factual distinctions and asking people for the specifics of their evidence, and if they are drawing inferences that are not warranted by the evidence they actually do have, then you're pointing that out is not a defense of Iran. You're pointing that out. It really isn't even the way they should treat it is, oh, he's asking me to be a little more rigorous in my fact checking. He's asking me to be more rigorous in drawing inferences from the evidence we do have. That will improve my case. The way I look at it,
Yeah,
improve my case for the morality.
Jim,
of
I savor and thrive in the face of somebody asking me for evidence.
Right.
Any claim I make, and if the evidence, like it did today, I previously read something and I sometimes you get conflated in your head what things say about civilian usage. You know what I mean? And I look, I say, okay, I'm wrong. That's it. There's no more. I don't need to keep going. Right? I don't know. Ian Gilmore made a claim in the chat. I don't know if he's right. I haven't researched it. I don't know. So, okay, I'll look into it. Right? But what's the problem? Present evidence. Make your case.
The evidence does need to be examined. Let's put it that way. And I don't think that there is a reasonable inference here, with all due respect to Ian, other than they have nuclear ambitions. I think that you'd be evading a whole bunch of other related facts.
Okay. So this is what I want to talk about.
Horizontal integration, as we call it in epistemology.
Yeah. Yes.
Horizontal integration leads to really only one reason. Conclusion.
So I want to go over some stuff. So Dinesh D'Souza posts this. I'm going to just read a few things here. Pete Hegseth says, every single day, especially in this town, all power, all honor, and all glory belongs to our Lord and Savior, Christ, Jesus Christ. Christ is King. That is our Secretary of War. Donald Trump posts this letter that he got from Franklin Graham. Dear President Trump, congratulations. The ceasefire between Israel and Hamas and the hostages being returned home are incredible accomplishments. Your leadership is historic. This is an answer to much prayer. Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers. And Mr. President, that is what you are. Some more stuff about the only one who can save us from hell is Jesus Christ. That sort of thing. I don't want to read the whole letter. And, it got me looking into things. And then there's these, there's these things that I sent you from the White House.
Mr. Trump is proud. He's got more religious figures advising him in the White House than any previous president.
Yeah. See, this is going to get, I like numbers you're going to get on my nerves with this, with a comment like that. I'm just telling you now. Like, if you don't like theocracies, you should see how bad Iran is. Yeah, so because Iran is a barbaric regime, we should let our leaders enact whatever the hell they want because that religion is different. That's just I don't know. I got to be honest here. Like, when you get ready to put something like that out there, what is the thought process? Honestly. Like, what is it? I just don't get it. Like, what?
Yeah,
what?
Iran is show, but you see, that's the thing. If Iran is an example for you, sir, then the worst thing to happen is the opposite end of the spectrum. The secular government America is supposed to be going in that direction at all.
I like numbers. It's nowhere near as bad was my point. My goal in life is not to be. I don't want to be anywhere as bad as the Iranians. No, that's not my goal. I'm sorry.
Any compromise on the principle of secular government, which you find in the First Amendment, the very first thing in the U.S. Bill of Rights is no establishment of religion. The very first thing that the framers wanted to put in there as an important limitation on the state is that it must be secular. And every time you chip away at that, every little chip away at that moves us in the direction of Iran. Understand that. You say, we're not as bad as Iran yet. Well, I have to add the yet, because if someone is trying to drag us away from the First Amendment, every step in that direction is the curse. Don't you see? If we're not as bad as Iran, it's because we have a First Amendment. If we start chipping away at the First Amendment, then we're heading in the direction of Iran.
Yeah, right. It's like Rob. I don't know why this reminds me of it, but it does. Rob Snyder said, he wants to institute the draft because freedom isn't free. You institute the draft, dummy, you're not free.
Impose slavery so we can defend freedom.
Right. So
You have to hear it. That's how you have to hear it.
So right now within the White House established the Faith Office.
Right.
Let me just share some statements here. J.D. Vance, the vice president, who is ahead in the polls according to CPAC for the presidency, he said that we have been, and by the grace of God, we always will be a Christian nation. Of course, it's false. He argues
I would
that
in fact say that that's not the law of the land. I mean, the treaty that John Adams hammered out way back in the 18th century says, and so it's a matter of American law. This was a treaty that was approved by the Senate, so it's U.S. law. America in no way is a Christian nation.
Yes.
Now that comes from the founding generation, John Adams, and a full-fledged approved treaty was done by our founding fathers.
Right. He also says that Christianity is our foundation. There's a 50-year war on Christianity. He publicly defends faith publicly. And then there's this Trump's, let me get rid of this here, Trump's spiritual advisor, Paula White Cain. She's been his spiritual advisor and pastor since 2002. And she has said, where is it here? I want to make sure I have it.
The good news here is that if she were put in a time machine back 300-400 years, she would be burnt at the stake as a heretic. She believes Christianity is all about material prosperity here on earth, for example. She's one of these prosperity evangelists who completely has changed the nature of the good news is she's altered what the understanding of Christianity was for most of its history. On the other hand, she and his whole faith office have greater prominence in this administration than in probably any other previous administration. People think of the way they think about this is absolutely wrong and upside down. The American Revolution represented something profoundly un-Christian, anti-Christian across the board. And this is something that conservatives will never get their head around. It's as if the Ten Commandments, think about it. A lot of it is just God protection, religion protection, no other God, no graven images, don't take the Lord's name in vain, honor the Sabbath, that kind of crap. Yeah. It's all about religion. But if they say, well, thou shalt not kill and thou shalt not steal, that's built into it's as if the Hebrews invented those rules. They didn't. They didn't. Yeah.
So
ancient Romans had rules against murder and theft.
Now, we also had, just recently, this is the last I'll say on this, and I want to pivot, is where J.D. Vance says he believes that there's demons, flying around, where people have thought they're aliens. He says, I think they're demons.
They're celestial beings.
They're demons,
They're absolutely terrifying.
So now, the Democrats, on the other hand, Elizabeth Warren wants a hidden millionaires tax, or she wants a millionaires tax.
And don't you see how deeply informed by Christianity that is?
Well,
that's actually more faithful. If you're gonna impose a social economic policy based on Christianity, socialism would be the much closer approximation
than capitalism.
An assault on wealth.
Yeah.
Wealth is bad, dangerous, suspicious. You get that all over the New Testament. And something among Democrats. You've got mystics, what is it, a quarter or a third of Democrats believe in extreme mysticism, deny, for example, creationism, or advocate creationism and deny, even among Democrats. But among Republicans, it's just so widespread.
So, Jim, as part of their policy initiatives, let's assume they win. So just so nobody thinks the Democrats are coming to our rescue, they want to codify and expand the Affordable Care Act. They have an anti-oligarchy agenda, climate, clean energy, tax increases on high earners, and of course the oversight investigations that will inevitably take place against Trump. The two of the candidates I've heard mentioned for president, AOC and Gavin Newsom, are for the same, sort of thing. And then I read an article about, how everybody on both sides now hates corporations. And it's just, there's such I can't help but think there's just this envy baked into all of this.
Yes.
Just hate the rich, hate the successful. What are your thoughts on that, Jim?
Well, so many atheists are, we haven't broken the shackles of the Dark Ages. People who would, think about it. Oh, it's 1 point something percent of the American population is Muslim. 2 point something percent of the American population is Jewish. 6 to 10% are atheists, depending on the poll you look at. Now think about that. Now, where are and non-affiliated? That's people who say they don't have any religion, but they're not willing to say they're atheists. That's something between 25 and 30%, again, depending on the poll you look at. Religiously non-affiliated people, which exist in both parties, by the way, just as religious to people who take religion seriously exist in both parties. But the Republicans in particular have identified themselves with religion and altruism. But so all of this, the social welfare programs that both sides seem to concede, the hatred of corporations, that's rooted in Christian values. Wealth is suspicious. Success on earth is suspicious. We want to help the poor. Helping the poor is the standard of all success. You'd rather us be, was the assistant of Jane Addams who went to the Soviet Union, said, wonderful it is, we're all equally shabby. That is a reflection of Christian attitudes that are against success and prosperity here on earth. That's why it's so ironic that you've got American evangelists who say, well, no, success and material prosperity is part of my Christianity. Boy, like I say, they'd be burnt at the stake as heretics if you put them in a time machine just a few centuries. But the values themselves, the socialist values on the left themselves, are from a bunch of people who might even say, look, I've rejected religion. But there's only one ethics that they can assume, the ethics of Christianity. And so they maintain this ethics. Ethics is transmitted mostly by emotion. And so while they've rejected, perhaps their, quote, scientific minds may have rejected supernaturalism and religion on the left, they have still not questioned any of the bases. So you'll have famous atheists like Richard Dawkins saying, I'm a cultural Christian, even though he's one of the most famous atheists in the world. He's a cultural Christian because they don't want to let go of that morality of Christianity. The morality of Christianity has still got its hold on a bunch of people. The morality of altruism, you see, that comes from religion. We haven't broken the chains of the Dark Ages yet.
No.
When people start advocating for truly this worldly policies, right, where success is not suspect in itself, where someone who invents something, creates something great, achieves something, becomes rich as a process, you say, hooray! You're making life on earth better. You're making your life better. It's a win-win for everybody. We're making material progress. No, that whole attitude, the attitude that underlies socialism, the attitude that underlies environmentalism, and why the right is simply morally incapable of mounting a moral defense of capitalism. The right is incapable, philosophically, so long as Christianity has its tentacles around them, they are going to be philosophically incapable of giving us a consistent moral objection to the welfare state or socialism or outright communism.
All right. So, Ian Gilmore, if you can message me and send me the sources that back up what you're saying, I would love to see them. I just haven't. I thought I saw it, but then maybe I didn't. If you could send it to me, I'd appreciate it, Ian. Thank you. Friday's question was, what habits would you like to cultivate? Jenna Kleem says, I like the habits I have now. I don't want more. And Robert Nasser says he wants to develop the habit of predefining his habits and then creating an environment which makes acting in accordance with them natural and no resistance. Okay, Jim, give us the capitalist thought of the day.
Capitalism is a system that is inconsistent with both mysticism and collectivism. It is a system that is inconsistent with the morality that religion has promoted since the dawn of time. Capitalism is inconsistent with religion. Religion gets your focus onto some other dimension, some other world, and pits human beings against their own body and against life on earth as such. It is no accident that mystics, both in the Eastern tradition and Western tradition, turn against their own very bodies and flagellate their flesh or deprive their flesh, because once you get your values oriented to another supernatural realm, there are higher values than life on earth. There is no higher value, ladies and gentlemen, than your life, which is an end in itself. There is no higher value than life, more important than life on earth. And capitalism is the only system that promotes human life on earth. And religion is therefore its inherent enemy.
Okay, thank you very much, Jim. My question for the audience is this. Please go to YouTube and answer it. Marco Rubio came out and said he believes, and I think if I'm wrong, I apologize, that the war will be lasting probably 2 to 4 more weeks. My question for the audience is, how long do you anticipate the war continuing for? I know it's speculation. I know it's a guess. That's what I'm asking you for. Please do that. And please tune in at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time today on this very channel for Everyday Ethics. Jim, thank you so much for joining me on the last minute today, by the way. I had you read a ton of articles, and then I completely changed the topic all at the last minute. You were spectacular. Thank you. Yes. Thank you, audience. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Until then, please check your premises. Peace.